I need to tell you up front that this story does not end with me getting on a plane home. I know that's usually how these videos go. Something terrifying happens, the person packs a bag, and 3 weeks later they're back in Ohio telling everyone they tried. That is not this video. What happened to me on that island was the most frightened I have been in my entire life. And it is also the reason I am more certain than I have ever been that I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Those two things live in the same sentence now, and it took me a long time to be okay with that. My name is Carol. I am 66 years old. 4 years ago, I sold a 3-bedroom house in Spokane, Washington, and moved to a small island off the coast of Palawan, a place with one sari store, no bank, no hospital, and at the time I moved there, no reliable cell signal unless you stood on a particular rock behind the church at a particular hour of the evening. I did not move there for adventure. I moved there because my sister Denise had married a man from the island 20 years earlier, and after my husband died and my daughter moved to Seattle for work, and my house suddenly felt like a museum of a life that wasn't happening anymore, Denise said, "Just come stay for a month." The month became 4 years. I want to describe the island to you before I tell you what happened, because you need to understand what isolated actually means in this story. It is not isolated the way a cabin in Montana is isolated, where you're an hour from a hospital and you have a truck. The island is a 90-minute boat ride from the nearest town with a clinic, and that boat does not run after dark, and it does not run at all when the water is bad. There are maybe 400 people living there. Everyone knows everyone. There is one small motorbike that belongs to the barangay captain and is used, in practice, for everything from moving lumber to carrying someone's grandmother to the boat when she needs to see a doctor on the mainland. I loved it there almost immediately, which surprised me. I had expected to feel afraid, a woman in her 60s alone in a place with no hospital and no husband and no daughter within 4,000 miles. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, which was necessary. People needed me for actual things. I taught English 3 mornings a week to a group of teenagers who wanted it for jobs on the mainland. I helped a woman named Feli keep the books for her little store, because arithmetic had never been her strength and it had always been mine. Denise and her husband Bert lived 4 houses down, close enough that I could hear their rooster in the morning, far enough that I had my own porch and my own quiet and my own life. I built something there. I want you to hold on to that because it matters for what comes next. The night I'm going to tell you about happened in October during typhoon season, though the storm itself was not the thing that nearly undid me. I want to be precise about that because I think it's important. The storm was the setting. It was not the danger. It had been raining for 2 days before it happened. The steady gray kind of rain that the island treats as background noise, nothing anyone gets excited about. The barangay captain had come by on the motorbike the evening before to say there was a tropical depression forming east of us, that it might strengthen, that we should keep our water containers full and bring anything loose indoors. This was not an unusual conversation. It happened 4 or 5 times a season. I filled my water jugs, brought in the plastic chairs from the porch, and went to bed without much thought. I woke up at around 11 at night because the sound had changed. I want to try to describe this for you because I think people who haven't experienced a real storm in a place with tin roofs don't understand the specific quality of the sound. It's not like rain on a suburban roof. It is a roar that has texture to it, that rises and falls with the gusts, and underneath it there's a rattling that comes from every loose piece of metal on every roof on the island, all doing the same thing at the same time. I lay there in the dark listening to it get worse for maybe 20 minutes, and then the power went, which was normal. The power always went in a bad storm, and I lit the candle I kept by the bed for exactly this reason, and told myself I would wait it out. Here is where the actual story starts, the part that is not just weather. Around midnight, my left arm started to hurt. I want to be careful here because I know some of you are already ahead of me, and I need to tell you that I did not immediately think what you're thinking, because I am stubborn, and because I had had a similar pain 8 months earlier that turned out to be a pinched nerve from sleeping wrong, and because the last thing a 66-year-old woman living alone on a remote island wants to consider, at midnight in a typhoon, with no boat running and no phone signal, is that she might be having a heart attack. So I told myself it was the nerve thing again. I sat up, I rubbed my shoulder, I drank some water, and then the pain moved into my jaw, and I felt a pressure in my chest that I can only describe as the feeling of something sitting on me. And I understood, with a kind of clarity that frightened me more than the pain did, that I needed to stop arguing with myself about what this was. I am going to tell you honestly what the next hour felt like, because I think the honesty matters more than making myself sound brave. I was terrified. Not in the abstract way you're afraid of something that might happen someday, but in the specific, physical way where your hands don't work right and your thoughts won't organize themselves. I sat on the edge of my bed in the candlelight, with the storm screaming outside, and I thought, very clearly, I might die in this room tonight, and no one will know until morning. My phone had no signal, which I already knew, but I checked it anyway 3 or 4 times. The way you check something you already know is broken, because some part of you refuses to believe it. I did the only thing that made sense, which was to get to Denise's house, 4 houses down, in a typhoon, at midnight, with what might have been a cardiac event happening in my chest. I am not going to pretend that was a well-reasoned decision. It might have been the wrong one. I have talked to a doctor about it since, and she told me that in some cases, moving around during a possible cardiac event is exactly the wrong thing to do, that I should have stayed still and waited. But I did not know that then, and staying alone in a dark room while something might be killing me felt like the worst of 2 terrible options, so I got up. I want to tell you what it was like to walk out that door, because it is the part I still think about. The wind hit me sideways the moment I stepped off the porch, hard enough that I had to grab the post to stay upright. The rain wasn't falling, it was traveling, horizontal, and it stung. I could not see more than a few feet in front of me, even with the small flashlight I'd grabbed, because the light just scattered into the rain and gave me nothing. The path between my house and Denise's, a path I had walked hundreds of times, a path I could probably walk with my eyes closed on an ordinary day, was unrecognizable. There was a coconut frond down across it that I didn't see until I was tangled in it. There was standing water higher than my ankles in places that were normally dry. And through all of it there was the pain in my chest, dull and insistent, and my own breathing, fast and shallow, and underneath everything, a thought I could not push away, which was that I had chosen this. I had chosen to live somewhere my own daughter could not reach me if something happened. I had chosen distance and independence and a smaller, simpler life. And here, at the exact moment when the cost of that choice might be the highest it would ever be, I could not decide if I regretted it. It took me almost 15 minutes to cover a walk that normally takes 90 seconds. I fell once, hard, onto my hands and knees in the mud, and I remember lying there for a moment, just a moment, with the rain hammering my back, thinking about simply staying there. Not out of despair exactly, out of a kind of exhaustion that made staying down feel easier than getting up. I want to tell you what got me up, because it wasn't courage, not really. It was Denise's face. I thought about her finding me in the morning, after the storm passed, on the ground between our houses, and I thought about what that would do to her for the rest of her life, and that thought got me back on my feet, more effectively than any thought about my own survival did. I reached her porch, and I did not have the strength left to knock properly. I hit the door with the flat of my hand 3 or 4 times, and I called her name, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted it to, swallowed by the wind. For a moment, nothing happened, and I remember the specific horror of that moment, standing on a porch in a typhoon with my chest tightening, wondering if she'd hear me at all. Then the door opened, and Bert was standing there in the candlelight with an expression that went from confusion to alarm in about half a second, because I must have looked the way I felt, which was gray and soaked and barely upright. He said my name, and I said, "Something's wrong with my heart," and I watched him turn and shout for Denise. And then everything moved very fast in a way that I experienced almost from a distance. The way you experience things when your body has decided to conserve everything it has for staying alive. They got me inside. Denise had her hands on my face, asking me questions I could barely answer. Bert was already outside again, in the storm, on foot, because the motorbike belonged to the barangay captain, and his house was 6 minutes away on a good night, and considerably longer than that in what was happening outside. I remember Denise sitting with me on the floor because I couldn't manage a chair, holding both my hands, talking to me in the specific steady voice she used to use with her kids when they were sick, telling me to breathe slow, telling me help was coming, telling me I was not going to die on her floor because she absolutely refused to allow it, which under any other circumstance would have made me laugh. I want to pause here and tell you something about fear, because I think this is the part of the story that actually matters, more than the storm, more than the pain in my chest. In that hour, sitting on my sister's floor, genuinely uncertain whether I was having a heart attack, genuinely uncertain whether help could reach me in time, I was not thinking about Spokane. I was not thinking I should have stayed in America where there's a hospital 12 minutes away. I want to be honest and tell you that thought did cross my mind once, briefly, somewhere in that walk through the storm. But sitting on that floor, what I actually felt, underneath the fear, was something that surprised me, which was gratitude that I was exactly where I was. Because the alternative version of my life, the one where I stayed in Spokane, was a life where I lived alone in a house with a spare bedroom nobody used, where my daughter called on Sundays, where nobody would have noticed if something happened to me until the mail piled up. Here, on this island, in the worst storm of the year, at midnight, my sister was holding my hands on her kitchen floor, and her husband was walking through a typhoon on foot to get help, because that is what this life had become. It was not safer in the way a hospital 12 minutes away is safer. But it was not the isolated, forgotten life I think people picture when they imagine an old woman alone on a remote island either. The barangay captain, whose name is Mando, arrived about 25 minutes after Bert left, soaked completely through, having walked the motorbike more than ridden it because the road was too flooded and too dark to ride safely. 25 minutes does not sound like a long time until you have spent it wondering if your chest is going to stop. He had with him, of all things, a small bottle of aspirin because someone on that island at some point had apparently told him that aspirin helps in a heart attack, and he had thought to grab it on his way out the door. I have since learned that this was, medically, exactly the right thing to have done, and I think about that often, that a man I have known for 4 years, in the middle of a typhoon, in the dark, had the presence of mind to remember something that might save my life. What followed was not a dramatic rescue in the way you see in movies. There was no boat that could safely cross that water at that hour. What there was Mando and Bert and Denise, taking turns sitting with me through the rest of the night, monitoring me, keeping me calm, keeping me talking, because the one thing everyone seemed to agree on was that whatever was happening, panic would make it worse. Denise's neighbor, a woman named Perla who had some training as a midwife decades earlier and was the closest thing the island had to medical expertise after dark, was fetched around 1 in the morning and sat with me, checking my pulse periodically with 2 fingers on my wrist and a look of fierce concentration on her face that I found, oddly, more reassuring than frightening. The pain in my chest eased somewhere around 3 in the morning. Not disappeared, but eased, enough that my breathing slowed and I stopped feeling like something was sitting on me. I do not know to this day, with complete medical certainty, whether that night was a heart attack, a severe episode of angina, or something else entirely, because by the time the water was calm enough to cross the following afternoon, and I made it to the clinic on the mainland, the acute episode had passed, and the tests they were able to run there were limited. The doctor who saw me said it was consistent with a cardiac event, possibly a mild one, and referred me for further testing in Puerto Princesa, which I did. and which showed some narrowing that I am now managing with medication, and, not incidentally, with a much better diet than the one I had in Spokane, where my idea of dinner most nights during my last few years there had been whatever came in a box. I want to tell you what stayed with me after that night, because I think it's more interesting than the night itself. It was not fear of the island. If anything, strangely, it was the opposite. It was a very clear understanding of exactly who was around me and exactly what they were willing to do for me, tested in the worst possible circumstances, at the worst possible hour, in a storm that made every single part of it harder than it needed to be. I had moved to that island 4 years earlier, telling myself and everyone else that I was building a life. That night I found out I actually had one. There is a difference between believing you have community and finding out at 1 in the morning in a typhoon that the community will walk through wind and flooding on foot to reach you. My daughter, when I finally reached her by phone 2 days later once the signal came back, cried on the phone for a long time and then asked me the question I knew was coming, which was whether this changed anything, whether I was finally going to consider moving somewhere with better medical access. I told her the truth, which is that I have thought about that question seriously, more seriously than I've thought about almost anything else in the years since I moved. And what I keep coming back to is this. In Spokane, in my old life, if something like that had happened to me, I would have been alone in that house. And my daughter is right, that 911 would have arrived faster than Mando did on foot through a flooded road. But I would also have been alone. No sister on the floor holding my hands. No neighbor with 2 fingers on my wrist through the night, refusing to leave. I have thought about it very honestly, turned it over more times than I can count, and I keep landing in the same place, which is that speed is not the only thing that keeps a person alive, and it is not the only thing that makes a frightening night survivable. Who is with you matters. What they're willing to do for you matters. And on that island, in the worst hour of my life so far, I found out exactly what I had built, and exactly what it was worth. I did make one change after that night, and I think it's worth mentioning, because it's practical rather than emotional. Mando arranged, through the barangay, for the island to get a satellite emergency communicator, the kind that can send a distress signal even with no cell coverage, and a small stock of basic emergency medical supplies kept at his house, including aspirin, which nobody had thought to formalize before because, frankly, nobody had needed to until that night. It's a small thing. It didn't fix the fact that the nearest hospital is still 90 minutes away by boat on a good day. But it means that the next time someone on that island has a night like mine, there is a faster way to call for help, and there is aspirin that doesn't depend on one man's memory of something he heard once. I still live there. I want to say that clearly, because I know some of you watching are waiting for the part where I tell you I moved to the mainland, or back to Spokane, chastened by how close it came. That's not what happened. I am more careful now. I know the early signs to watch for. I take my medication faithfully, which I was not always disciplined about with my old prescriptions back home, if I'm honest. I've made sure Denise, Bert, Mando, and Perla all know exactly what my symptoms look like that night and what to watch for, and I carry a card in my wallet with a summary of my medical history, in case I'm ever somewhere unfamiliar. But I did not leave, because the scariest night of my life was also, strangely, the night I understood most clearly why I stayed in the first place. If you're thinking about a life like this one, in a place remote enough that help isn't fast, I'm not going to tell you it's without real risk, because it isn't, and I would be lying to you if I pretended that night wasn't as frightening as anything I have ever lived through. But I would ask you to think about more than just distance to the nearest hospital when you're weighing a decision like that. Ask who would be there. Ask what they would do, because on the worst night of my life, what saved me wasn't speed. It was people who loved me enough to walk into a storm on foot to reach me, and I have never, not for one single day since, regretted building a life where those were the people around me.